and welcome to my channel. This was not supposed to be the first video on my channel. I am still currently working on that, but some pretty big stuff has come up in between my recording of that, and I just felt like it was really important to discuss. So let me give a little bit of background on myself. I am an LMSW, and back in 2019, when I was in my graduate level social welfare policy class, our final assignment was a policy evaluation and a debate about an assigned policy. The policy that I was given was Roe v. Wade, and I was ecstatic to get this assignment because it's something that has been near and dear to my heart and that I truly believe in and am in favor of. Since most people don't have a background in policy, I thought it would be helpful to take that original policy evaluation and break it down to a way for everybody else to understand the way that policy is evaluated. So when you're evaluating policy, you have to start by defining the problem that necessitates the need for the policy, aka what is the issue being addressed and who is it for. The second is to describe the policy, basically lay it out in a way that if I was to write it down on a pamphlet, people would be able to understand the policy. The third is to go through the history of the policy. And the fourth is to give arguments for and against the policy. So this would be where you lay out what people who are in favor of or against would say about the policy and whether or not it's good or bad policy. Fifth, you evaluate the policy using statistics to back up and support your position. And finally, you would give recommendations on what you believe should be done with the policy and how you could strengthen it or even overturn it. This is the basic anatomy of evaluating policy. And I truly believe that knowledge is power. So I wanted to make this so that people who don't have the same background can understand why Roe was so important and why it is, in my opinion, good policy to begin with. I have taken this debate from 2019 and I'm trying to give it kind of a post-mortem of sorts for Roe v. Wade, the policy. I want to support my claims for why I believe it was good policy, and I want to end the video by giving you guys some resources so that if you or anyone you know needs access to common healthcare procedures, you can access them safely. I want to be clear that abortion rights have not been taken away entirely. Our rights, which once remained between a woman and her doctor, have now instead been given to the states to decide. And I personally don't want my dumb fuck state deciding what happens with my body. There's this misguided belief held by white supremacists. It's a concept called the birth dearth. It's something from the 1980s that says that there are not enough white babies being born and that 60% of white babies are being aborted. So if you were able to stop them, then you would have more white babies being born, which is fucking stupid and misguided because I'll show you with data that white women of means will always get or find access to an abortion, whereas poor women and women of color will suffer the most. Make no mistake that because of overturning Roe v. Wade, it will directly contribute to a rise in infant mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, and DV-related assaults and homicides against pregnant women. This issue is near and dear to me because my family, like many other families, walked around our whole lives knowing a dirty little secret. When I was younger, I was told this story and was always told not to tell anybody. You see, I come from two strong cultural backgrounds who do not talk about emotions or feelings, and you definitely never aired your family's dirty laundry. But I am the great-granddaughter of a woman who died giving herself a clothes hanger abortion. I can only imagine her reasons and the desperation she must have felt to have come to that decision. But I know the profound impact it left on her son, my granddad, and how it reverberates throughout an entire family system. My grandfather, at 8 years old, spent every day after his mom's death, up until his teen years, going to the cemetery and staring in at her grave plot. My family's dirty little secret is one that many other families hold to, and I'm tired of acting like it's a mark of shame. I am my great-grandmother's granddaughter, and I want to do her justice since I live in a time where I can speak out. I want to be clear, this reversal is inherently pro-baby, not pro-choice. It's pro-birth. Because if it was a pro-life decision, the government would work harder to provide better maternal health care, invest more in education, require all companies to offer paid maternity and paternity leave, provide livable wages for families to actually be able to support the families you want them to have, provide evidence-based sexual health education in public schools, improve access to family planning and contraceptives, making diapers and formula cheaper, improving the care and outcomes of children in foster homes, group homes, and adoption centers, and the list goes on and on. It shows that they only care about the fetus and not the woman, and they only care about the baby and not the child. So with those thoughts out of the way, let me break down the history of abortion for you. Abortion was first made illegal under most circumstances in most states beginning in the mid-1800s, with Connecticut being the first state to restrict abortion. It prohibited the use of toxic substances to cause miscarriage after quickening, or when a woman can feel the baby moving inside of them, and several other states followed. By the turn of the century, all states had laws against abortion, but these laws were rarely enforced, and women of means and wealth were still able to obtain assistance in terminating their pregnancies. In the late 19th century, the American Medical Association was founded and abortions began to be criminalized. The doctors of the AMA decided that abortion providers of the time, commonly midwives and herbalists, posed unwanted competition, and they went about eliminating that competition. And the Catholic Church joined doctors in condemning the practice. In the late 1930s, abortion laws started being enforced when the number of abortions significantly increased during the Great Depression. The dangerous practice of unregulated abortions led to a high U.S. mortality rate, with a study done in 1931 showing illegal procedures to be responsible for 14% of maternal deaths. In the 1960s, states began to reform their strict anti-abortion laws, so prior to the Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade, legal abortions were already available in 17 states under a range of circumstances beyond just the preservation of a woman's life. In 1971, Norma McCorvey, aka Jane Roe, a single pregnant woman who did not want to continue her pregnancy, filed a case in the courts against District Attorney of Dallas County, Henry Wade, who enforced the Texas law which prohibited abortion except to save a woman's life. The abortion law in Texas had been declared unconstitutional in an earlier federal district court case, but Wade ignored the ruling and both sides appealed. In December 1971, the case was argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. It wasn't until January of 1973 that the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 7-2 decision, affirmed the legality of a woman's right to have an abortion under the 14th Amendment's right to privacy clause of the Constitution. Roe v. Wade was a landmark court decision of 1973 that gave a woman the right to an abortion during the entirety of the pregnancy and defined different levels of state interest for regulating abortion in the second and third trimesters. The different levels of state interest are defined as such. This is the breakdown of what Roe v. Wade originally held. It said that during the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, no regulation was allowed by the states. The decision was left to a woman and a qualified physician. However, the states were allowed to regulate the medical practice of abortion, making it harder to find providers who would safely do the procedure. During the second trimester, the states may regulate abortion in ways reasonably related to a woman's health. And in the third trimester, from the point of viability, the Supreme Court states that the state may regulate, even prohibit abortion consistently with its interest in the potentiality of human life, except where necessary inappropriate medical judgment for the preservation of the life or health of a woman. The woman's interest in privacy and liberty are as strong as before. However, once the fetus is viable, the court believes that the states may choose to regulate, even prohibit abortion, as long as the life and the health of the mother are not threatened. In a related decision, the court made clear that by health, it meant both physical and psychological health. Along with Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court settled Doe v. Bolton, which declared abortion as a right to privacy, and hospital therapeutic abortion boards were unconstitutional. I am not even going to be touching on hospital therapeutic abortion boards right now, but continuing on, with these different levels of state interest in mind, it's important to note that there was always the potential for conflict between the third trimester and the viability requirements, since technology keeps pushing the moment of viability earlier and earlier. From the standpoint of medical viability, there is no sharp limit of development, gestational age, or weight at which a human fetus automatically becomes viable. According to studies between 2003 and 2005, 20 to 35% of babies born at 24 weeks of gestation survive, while 50 to 70% of babies born at 25 weeks and more than 90% born at 26 to 27 weeks survive. It's my position that Roe v. Wade was good policy, with 73% of Americans saying they did not want to see it overturned. It was good policy because the ruling helped prevent deaths from unsafe, illegal abortions that prior to its passage disproportionately affected women of color. Outlawing abortion does not end abortion, but instead pushes women back to seeking unsafe termination methods. Estimates of illegal abortions in the 1950s and 1960s ranged from 200,000 to 1.2 million per year. The prevalence of illegal abortions is indicated by its death toll. According to Rachel Gold, in 1930, abortion was listed as the official cause of death for as many as 2,700 women, nearly one-fifth of maternal deaths recorded that year. By 1965, that number fell to just under 200, although the actual number was likely much higher. Those were just the numbers that were officially reported. A study done in New York in the 1960s found that poor women and their families were disproportionately impacted, with 1 in 10 having attempted to terminate pregnancy by illegal abortion, and almost 1 in 4 reporting that a friend, relative, or acquaintance had attempted to obtain an abortion. Of the low-income women in the study that had an abortion, 8 in 10 reported that they had attempted a self-induced procedure, with only 2% saying that a physician had been involved in any way. In 1962 alone, 1,600 women were admitted to the Harlem Hospital Center in New York for incomplete abortions. This meant that for every 42 deliveries, there was 1 abortion-related admission. In 1968, the University of Southern California's Los Angeles County Medical Center admitted 701 women with septic abortions, 1 abortion-related admission for every 14 deliveries. There was also a clear racial disparity in the data of mortalities due to illegal abortions. In the early 1960s in New York, 1 in 4 childbirth-related deaths among white women was due to an abortion. In contrast, abortion accounted for 1 in 2 childbirth-related deaths among non-white and Puerto Rican women. In the early 1970s, when abortions were legal in some states, illegal abortion was still out of reach for many, and minority women suffered the most. In 1972 alone, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimated that 130,000 women obtained illegal or self-induced abortion, with 39 dying during the process. Between 1972 and 1974, the mortality rate due to illegal abortions was 12 times higher for non-white women than their white counterparts. Roe v. Wade was good policy because it allowed a woman to have the procedures performed at healthcare facilities by trained medical professionals, which allowed it to become one of the safest procedures performed in the United States. The court held that a woman's right to abortion fell within the right to privacy, which was recognized in Griswold v. Connecticut, protected by the 14th Amendment. Griswold v. Connecticut was a landmark case of 1965 about a woman's access to contraception. It ruled in favor of the constitutional right for married persons to use birth control. All women benefited from the decision of Roe v. Wade by making abortion safe and legal in all 50 states during the entirety of their pregnancy and outlining those different levels of state interest in the second and third. The decision ended up affecting laws in 46 states, and women who wanted to end an unwanted pregnancy were now protected, and the procedure could be performed by a trained medical professional. Abortion is one of the safest procedures in the U.S. with a safety record of 99%. Women experience serious complications associated with abortion less than 1% of the time. According to a study done by Coble, Etz, Head, et al. That compared induced termination of pregnancy before and after Roe v. Wade, deaths from legal abortions declined 5-fold between 1973 and 1985, from 3.3 deaths to 0.4 deaths per 100,000 procedures, reflecting increased physician education and skills, improvements in medical technology, and notably the earlier terminations of pregnancy. Legal abortion mortality between 1979 and 1985 was 0.6 deaths per 100,000 procedures, more than 10 times lower than the 9.1 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births between 1979 and 1986. Serious complications from legal abortions are rare. Roe v. Wade was good policy because it established that a woman's right to privacy and liberty were protected under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. This right has now been given to the states. And unfortunately, whether you want to hear this or not, abortions are a common part of women's health care. And because Roe v. Wade has been reversed, 1/3 of women reproductive age in America will lose their ability to access abortions in their states. Abortions are a common health intervention. Approximately 1 in 5 people capable of getting pregnant will have an abortion by age 30, and 1 in 4 by age 45. Many studies indicate that the inability to afford abortion care places pregnant individuals further into poverty and harms their health and well-being, as well as the well-being of their current and future children. Many people lack the means and access to decide whether to continue a pregnancy. Limits on federal funding for abortions cause significant harm to low-income people, in particular communities of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, and residents of rural areas. Both states and federal governments enact legislation and policies that shape abortion access, including whether insurance will cover their abortions. Abortion is healthcare, period. Nearly 1 in 4 women in the United States will have an abortion during their lifetime. According to the CDC, women in their 20s accounted for a majority of abortions in 2015 and throughout the period of analysis. The majority of abortions in 2015 took place early in gestation, with 91.1% of abortions being performed before 13 weeks of gestation. A smaller number of abortions, 7.6%, were performed between 14 and 20 weeks gestation, and even fewer, 1.3%, were performed after 21 weeks gestation. Since nationwide legalization of abortion in 1973, the proportion of abortions performed after the first trimester decreased because of increased access to and knowledge about safe, legal abortions. It is suggested that this number would be even smaller if women had greater access to safe legal abortions, with most women who have had an abortion saying that they would have preferred to have had it earlier, but financial limitations and/or lack of knowledge about the pregnancy caused them to delay. A woman should have accurate information about her pregnancy options. Information should support a woman, help her decide for herself, and enable her to take care of her health and well-being. It should not be provided with the intent of shaming or coercing her. In conclusion, it is my position that Roe v. Wade was good policy because it prevents deaths from unsafe, illegal abortions that prior to its enaction disproportionately affected women of color. It was good policy because procedures could take place in healthcare facilities by trained medical professionals, and it became one of the safest procedures in the U.S. Roe v. Wade was good policy because it upheld a woman's right to privacy under the 14th Amendment. And Roe v. Wade was good policy because abortions are a common part of women's health care, and because of it being overturned, over 1/3 of women reproductive age in America are going to be negatively impacted. So what does it mean now that Roe's been overturned? Well, I have a list of resources below, such as funds to help individuals cross state lines if necessary to access care, ways that you can find rallies and protests in your area, and ways to sign up for direct action events put on by your local reproductive care facilities. You can petition to get the issue on state ballots. That is so important, and I will leave links below on how you can do that. You can also run for or support running for those small local offices and vote in low-level elections. I know that they're boring and you usually don't know most of the people, but you can change that. It honestly is easier than you think. Stupidly, it is easier than you think. And you can also share your story, which I think is the most important thing that we can do, is to force America to listen or see the consequences of its actions. I believe that they should hear and see the stories of women just like my grandmother. Ahoy, in other nautical terms. It's Editing Me here, and I just want to say, since I filmed this about a week ago, we have already had a story of a 10-year-old girl from Ohio who had to seek abortion out of state as a result of a 6-week heartbeat ban bill in her state. She was 6 weeks and 2 days pregnant as a result of a sexual assault, and she had to cross state lines to get the procedure done. In Tennessee, there are reports of women not being able to get their implanted contraceptives reinserted. Clinics are canceling appointments and telling women who rely on these contraceptives for more than just birth control, such as those with blood clot disorders, that they are able to remove the implanted contraceptive, but they're not able to replace it. In Louisiana, the courts are about to decide if the last 3 clinics in the state can stay open. And the closest clinic outside of Louisiana is 700 miles away in Illinois. This is a burden to women from this state and other southern states that are seeking abortion care because poverty and financial limitations often keep the procedures out of reach for many. Again, 1/3 of all women reproductive age in America are being impacted by the decision made 2 weeks ago. The consequences of the ruling are being immediately felt and will only radiate out from here. Sharing your story has never been more important. And lest we all forget the past, I want to close this video out by recounting the story of Jerry Santoro. The story comes from the Vice article retelling the story of Miss Santoro's body photographed and shown in Miss Magazine from back in the 1970s. In 1973, Miss Magazine published a haunting photo of a woman named Jerry Santoro who died of a back alley abortion. At the time, no one could have predicted what impact it would have on the pro-choice movement. People knew of Geraldine Jerry Santoro's cause of death, an air embolism caused by a back alley abortion, before they ever knew her name. On June 8, 1964, the 28-year-old married woman and her lover, Clyde Dixon, checked into Connecticut's now-closed Norwich Motel with no vacation suitcases or change of clothes for an overnight stay. Instead, she brought a catheter and a textbook. Santoro, 6.5 months pregnant, was prepared to let Dixon perform her illegal abortion. That is, until she started hemorrhaging during the process and Dixon panicked, abandoning Santoro to bleed to death on the motel floor. Born on August 16, 1935, Jerry Twerdy grew up with 10 brothers and 4 sisters in an old farmhouse in rural Coventry, Connecticut. In the 1995 documentary Leona's Sister Jerry, her family and friends recall memories of her. She climbed trees to avoid the chores she disliked. She and her best friend would sneak out of school to change out of their dress code mandated dresses and into their jeans while playing hooky, and she always smelled like juicy fruit gum. But when she was just 18 and in a rush to get hitched before her best friend, Jerry decided to marry a man she'd only met 4 weeks prior at a bus stop. His name was Sam Santoro, and he would go on to father 2 daughters with Jerry, all of whom would become victims of his physical abuse. So, when she met 43-year-old Clyde Dixon, a fellow employee at the Mansfield Training School who ostensibly cared for her, she took him as her lover when Sam was living and working in California. But when Jerry found herself pregnant, and Sam unknowing of everything and with an imminent return to Connecticut to visit Jerry and the daughters, she feared for her safety. So Jerry, or Margaret Reynolds, according to the motel ledger, checked into the motel room with Dixon only to die alone after Dixon had attempted and failed to abort the fetus with a catheter. It wasn't until the next day that a maid discovered Santoro's naked body. Her torso collapsed over her kneeling legs with only blood-soaked sheets between her and the carpet. 3 days later, Dixon and Milton Ray Morgan, a colleague at Mansfield who helped Dixon access the textbook, would be arrested, and Dixon would be charged with manslaughter and conspiring to commit an illegal abortion. He would go on to only serve a year. Santoro's body was photographed for crime scene documentation at the time. In April 1973, 9 years after her death and just a half a year after the passing of Roe v. Wade, Miss Magazine published the photo of Santoro. At the time, the body was anonymous to them. Never again was the headline that ran with the story and the image, which quickly became an iconic symbol for the pro-choice movement. After the passing of Roe v. Wade, the editors of Miss thought the struggle was finally over. At that point, we naively believed that that would be the end of the story and that never again would women be lying on the floor in their own blood in a hotel room because of a botched abortion, says Suzanne Braun-Levin, who served as Miss's first editor from its founding in 1972 to 1988. That once the Supreme Court had made the ruling, safe abortions would be available to everyone everywhere. On the other end of the phone, Levin laughs. An estimated 1.2 million women in the U.S. resorted to illegal abortions every single year before Roe v. Wade, and those abortions directly led to as many as 5,000 annual deaths, according to the NARAL Foundation. The more restrictive abortion laws in a given country or state, the higher the instances of unsafe abortion, which today account for about 13% of maternal deaths globally, according to a 2008 World Health Organization study. Unsafe abortions are frequently performed by providers lacking qualifications and skills to perform induced abortions, and some abortions are self-induced, the World Health Organization study explained. The lack of safeguards, hygienic conditions, and incorrect administration of medication can lead to things like post-abortion sepsis, hemorrhaging, and genital trauma, all of which can lead to death. Today, the death rate from induced abortions is 0.6 for every 100,000 procedures in the U.S., making abortion as safe as an injection of penicillin, according to the World Health Organization. Abortion-related deaths are also rare in countries where the procedure is legal, accessible, and performed early in the pregnancy by skilled providers, according to NARAL. However, the World Health Organization also states in 2003, 13% of maternal deaths worldwide were due to unsafe abortion, and this number was unchanged in 2008. While the passing of Roe v. Wade legalized abortion in the U.S. more than 40 years ago, accessing safe, legal abortions both in the U.S. and the rest of the world is not always possible. In Indiana this past year, Governor Mike Pence signed a vicious law that would require Indiana women to pay for the funerals of their aborted fetuses. And in many states, there still exist laws around admitting privileges, waiting periods, and patient transfer agreements, all of which obstruct women's legal access to reproductive care. Well, back then, there weren't a lot of options, and today there are more. With birth control, morning after pills, and legal abortion, there are still a lot of obstacles, Berman says. There isn't this sense that women are dying from back alley abortions, which is why visuals now focus on things like what do women go through to get around the people screaming that they're baby killers at clinics. When Levin and Brands Gratz published the photo of the anonymous woman in 1973, they intended for it to serve as a relic of a time past, to graphically illustrate the progress made with Roe v. Wade. But as Levin and Brands Gratz speak of the image 40 years later, the inflection in their voices does not mimic the celebratory tone of never again. 1 or 2 generations of young women don't know the genesis of this photograph, Brands Gratz says. This image was the consequence of a backwards legal system that turned women not only into criminals, but often into corpses. Who expected, who would have anticipated how much backtracking would occur since? In closing out this video, I just want to say to continue sharing your stories. They are so important. Find creative ways to participate in social justice. Fight for those who are unable to fight for themselves. Don't let the Supreme Court officials who made this ruling have one moment's peace. Every chance you get, tell them how you feel. I would advocate for using their lawns as public restrooms, although I don't think that that's legal, so don't do that, but don't let them have a moment's peace. Don't let up. As the Lorax says, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Thank you for hearing me out, even though this was not my first planned video. It is something very important to me, and hopefully these resources or just even understanding the policy better helps you in some way. Leave a comment below if there's anything that you would like to say on this topic, or if it's directly affected you. Share your stories. Please, I advocate for that heavily. Like and subscribe. I have stuff not related to this in the works. My actual first video should be coming up here in the next month, so look out for that. Turn on that notification bell if you want to see this beautiful face again. Thank you. Thank you to Space Face for letting me use your song. They have a new album out, Anemia. You can go check it out on wherever you listen to music. And I just want to send them a huge thank you for letting me use your song as my intro, outro music. You guys are amazing, and I could not be more chuffed to be using your music. I also just want to point out my awesome t-shirt that says Spice Girls. I don't really have anything else to go with that. I just wanted to throw that in at the end. And yeah, until next time, remember, it's chaos, so be kind.